This is the Advanced Science Academy at Morris Catholic High School. So let's begin. This is a pretty quick paper, I think. It's pretty simple and it's pretty important. Um, so Campbell Chapman is going to, because she's a suck up, chose a circadian paper, and it is on neonicotinoids and how they disrupt circadian rhythms and sleep in honeybees. If you've had me in class, I probably have mentioned the drama surrounding publishing this paper. It was
All right. So, just for some background information, honeybees are critical pollinators, and recently their numbers have significantly declined. This is thought to be due to habitat loss, climate change, pesticide use, and a few other reasons. Neonicotinoid pesticides are agonists of insect nicotinic cholinergic receptors. So these receptors are for acetylcholine. And sublethal exposures to these neonicotinoids are linked to reduced hive survival. So these sublethal exposures, that pretty much just means that these effects are anything except for the honeybees dying. So honeybees rely on their circadian clocks for foraging orientation and navigation, time memory for food sources, sleep, and learning memory processes. So essentially, circadian clocks in honeybees are key for their survival. And lastly, insect circadian clock neurons receive light through cholinergic signaling. So in this paper, scientists decided to put these three pieces of information together and test specifically how the neonicotinoids affect honeybee circadian rhythms. So for the procedure, honeybees were captured at hive entrances and were monitored for up to 8 days with ad libitum access to bee candy. So ad libitum pretty much just means that they could eat whenever they wanted. They didn't have like a specific diet restriction. And this bee candy consisted of honey, powdered sugar, and it was either with or without the addition of the neonicotinoids. And the two neonicotinoids used in this study are thiamethoxam and clothianidin. So once they fed the bees the candy, they then collected brains from each group at 24-hour intervals over 4 days and then tested for the two neonicotinoids. And so the control did not have these oh my gosh, I'm having a stroke. Neonicotinoids. So let's just start out with figure 1. So letter A for figure 1 is the control. This is a actogram, so it pretty much just shows when the bees were active, and like the time. So I'm just gonna zoom in. The gray is showing that there was no light, and then the white is the light. And so after 4 days of a light dark cycle, they did a DD, which is complete darkness, for 4 days. And so after the 4 days of light dark, you can see that the rhythms pretty much remained rhythmic. And so it's just like kind of the same, even without light. And this is just a control. And so, yeah. Next, you can see in B that the bees with the clothianidin, after the 4 days of the light dark, they went into complete darkness and they lost their rhythm. And you can see from days 5 through 8 that it's just like activity during the night, and there was no stop of activity when there should have been. And then for C, the thiamethoxam, they were still rhythmic, but the circadian rhythms were altered. So they weren't completely like they should have been for the control, but they weren't completely arrhythmic. And then lastly, figure D shows how some bees with the clothianidin neonicotinoid were able to have a rhythm still, but it was just altered. So some still had a rhythm and some just had theirs altered. And so In figures E and F, it shows that only 12% of unexposed control bees became arrhythmic with the complete darkness. However, 46% of the thiamethoxam dosed and 42% of the clothianidin dosed bees lost circadian behavioral rhythms. In G and H, the dosed bees both have varying activity. So you can see how the thiamethoxam, the red is the ones that are dosed, and that they like still had more activity during the night, and it just was different than the controls. And then in the clothianidin, they were still more active during the night when they should have been less active. And so in I and J, you can see that there was more than a 3-hour delay in time of activity offset in dosed bees compared to the undosed. And in K, the delay in activity offset even went into the first day of constant darkness in bees that consumed clothianidin, which indicates a shift in circadian rhythms relative to the light cycle. And then lastly, in L, ingestion of thiamethoxam, but not the clothianidin, lengthened the free-running period of locomotor rhythms measured in constant darkness after the light dark. And so the free-running period is the length of time it takes for an organism's rhythm to repeat. So just essentially, the thiamethoxam was different than the clothianidin because it lengthened this period, which is not a good thing. So now I'm going to hand this over to RC for figure 2.
So for this one, it's giving you like a more experimental comparison of when the bees are left in full darkness. So that's part A, which is DD, dark, and then comparing that to when it's in like full light, which is LL light for the cycle. And in both of these variables, there is under a the thiamethoxam. You can see that in the dark one, it has a fairly it has a cycle, which is rhythmic, but in the light one, it's arrhythmic. So the cycle is messed up by the light, even though they're both under the same thiamethoxam treatment. And then C and D show you an actual percentage of their how many bees were actually affected by the cycle or the chemical or the combination of the two. And so in the dark cycle, it's a lot less at any what is ppb? Is that parts per billion?
Yeah.
So at the control, which is without any thiamethoxam, versus in both ones, so in the dark one versus the light one, the dark has about 9% of the bees, but in the light one, it's like 28, I believe. And that just shows that the light itself has an effect on it, which is then just furthered by the thiamethoxam, which you can see at like 70 parts per billion, because in the dark it's around 20, whereas in the light one, it's around like 40 something. And so this just kind of shows you the that there's an effect of light and also thiamethoxam on the rhythmicness of the different circadian rhythms.
Yeah, so like RC said, the biggest takeaway from this figure is that this shows that there could be an interaction between light specifically with the neonicotinoid ingestion. The LL disrupted rhythms in 28% of undosed bees compared to only 9% of arrhythmicity in the constant darkness when thiamethoxam was combined with light. 34% of bees exposed to 25 parts per billion and 46% of bees exposed to 70 parts per billion became arrhythmic. So now we're going to go to figure 3, and Nolan.
One sec.
Okay.
Go back. I was thinking about this, Campbell, I went back to the paper. Why did they run this test? Why was this important?
This one?
Yeah.
This one just shows how the light specifically, because in A, there was no light, and it showed that there was a rhythm with the thiamethoxam. But then in B, they have only light, and there was just no rhythm at all. So it shows how the light input specifically impacts the circadian rhythm with, like, being paired to the neonicotinoid.
I think where I'm getting stuck here is that you've got an A and you've got a B from the animals that were arrhythmic. Well, at least in B is arrhythmic, but there's no comparison to what it should look like in normal. Are you supposed to go back to like figure 1 to see that? Let me see. I don't know what a bee's behavior looks like in constant light because they never show it.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that does make sense. They definitely should have included like a control for this figure.
No, I don't really know. I don't think I would have let this fly if my name was on the paper. I think I would have wanted to see it because I don't understand really what the value is in this figure. Light has an effect on the clock. No kidding. Really? Light interacts with the drug to have a more profound effect? Well, if you're going to claim that, I need to see what the controls look like in constant light. Right?
Yeah.
All right. Go to
Well,
3.
bees don't see light as we see light. They see it as UV.
You're an environmentalist. You don't know what you're talking about. What do you mean they don't see light the way we? What do you mean? What does that mean?
That's why bees are attracted to really, really bright colored flowers. They're attracted to UV light signatures, especially those of like blues. So
Silliness.
yeah.
Silliness. No, so bees do have regular cones, photoreceptors, just like we do. But what Miss Liff's saying is they also have more profoundly useful UV receptors. And I say more useful because the honors class this morning, and we actually discussed that humans have UV receptors that pretty much go unused because our corneas and our lenses block the UV. If you take the cornea and lens out, like during cataract surgery, your view of the world changes a lot. But okay, so this is like kind of an aside, but the wavelength that sets the circadian clock for all animals is around 488 nanometers, which is a light blue light, kind of like the old happy light I used to have in class in school. You remember the blue one? Okay, go ahead. Go to figure 3.
All right, now I'm going to hand this over to Nolan.
Alrighty, so this one is pretty straightforward. It's just showing how overall the honeybee sleep is impaired by the neonicotinoids. So for figure A, that shows the amount of sleep that the bees get during each half-hour interval over the course of a 24-hour circadian cycle. And so for A, that is the control as compared to the thiamexetham group, and for B, it's comparing it to the clothianidin group. And you can see how in both the neonicotinoid groups are significantly lower in the amount of sleep that they get each interval than the regular control group. And so that's for in a light-dark cycle. And then C and D have a similar message. It's about the total duration of sleep that the bees get, and it just contrasts it at different concentrations of the neonicotinoids at 25 parts per billion, 70 parts per billion, and 140 parts per billion. And so you can see in general, as the amount goes up, the sleep duration goes down. There is a fluctuation kind of at like 70 parts per billion in the thiamethoxam group, but Campbell and I were thinking it's just kind of similar. It doesn't seem to be like all that meaningful in terms of expressing anything other than that, the neonicotinoids impair sleep. And then carrying on to E and F, that's about the number of sleep episodes that the honeybees have throughout the day. So that's just the number of times that they're asleep. Oh, and I don't know if I clarified, sleep was measured in episodes where they were inactive for 5 or more minutes. So that's what they determined as sleep. And so, yes, it just shows the decrease in sleep overall.
Yeah, so like Nolan said, the biggest takeaway here is that both the neonicotinoids heavily reduce the total number of sleep episodes that the bees had and the duration of sleep for each episode, which is very negative. And lastly,
hold on. I just want to let's just recap real quick what the argument is, right? So, figure 1, there is a profound effect on circadian rhythmic behavior if given the drug. Figure 2 is that light interacts with the drug to cause some sort of a rhythmicity or effect, some profound effect. Figure 3 is it changes sleep architecture, or at least the bouts, right? Right?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. All right. I just wanted to make sure that we were clear.
And now figure 4, which will be handed off to Lila.
So basically the whole point of all 3 of these is to prove the argument of the behavior deficit at the molecular level. So what they did for that is they took the bee brains and took out neurons from them, particularly the ones that had to do with sleep, and then exposed the top one to the clothanidin, aka cloth, and then the bottom one just stayed the same as a control. So as you can kind of see, the one exposed to cloth kind of went nuts, which I'll explain why it looks like that in a second, and the bottom one just stayed the same. So the reason that you can see the visible change is because when neurons are excited, they take in calcium, and these neurons were put in dishes of calcium, and you can see the difference because they took them in, and that's why the intensity is so much higher. So chart B is just showing the spike of the data that was shown in A, which is really, really clear, which is why C is kind of unnecessary, but it shows kind of the statistics of it and if you want to see the numbers of it. But B pretty visibly shows that there is a giant difference when you expose it to the pesticide, and that's it.
Yeah, so essentially this figure is showing that when exposed to the clothianidin, the individual neurons are active way more than they should be. And so this shows that the clock genes are always on when they shouldn't be. So when the lights are off, the neurons should be way less active. But here we can see that they're pretty much active most of the time, which is very negative for the bees' circadian rhythms and overall health. So, conclusions and implications. Neonicotinoids disrupt circadian rhythms in exposed honeybees. They delay activity offset, extend activity into the night, and impair honeybee sleep. And though many pesticides advertise that they are honeybee friendly, in reality they can negatively affect honeybee circadian rhythms, a critical process for bee survival, which eventually leads to death.
Okay, so do these pesticides kill bees?
Not directly.
Okay, so I'm in continue to
Well,
advertise that it's not going to kill bees.
well, they don't specifically, like, they're not killing bees like immediately, but they have negative effects on the circadian rhythms of honeybees, which will eventually lead to death. So, I mean, yeah, they do kill the bees.
Does this in the paper, does it show evidence of colony collapse that can be linked to this in any way?
I mean,
Did they measure colony populations?
I don't think so, no.
Yeah, so not in this paper. That's still up in the air about that important question. If this is important because we think it's causing colony collapse, then you need to show direct evidence that it's causing colony collapse, right?
Yeah.
Which is why it's published in scientific reports and not Science or Nature. Scientific reports is their impact factor is only about 4. I think it's a really important paper, but it ended up not being in a super high. It did not. I don't know. Let me ask you, Campbell, did it deserve to be in scientific reports?
I mean, I definitely think it was good enough for scientific reports, but I feel like it could have been in something with a higher impact factor, just because of how important this is.
Yeah, so you think it underachieved?
Yeah.
Yeah, me too. Vanya?
I know it disrupts the circadian clocks, but like how much, like, is there like a percentage of how many bees it actually kills, like what the probability is? Because if it just, like, I know it just harms them, but if it's like guaranteed that every bee that's exposed to it will die, or if it's like just one of those things that affects them a little bit.
Campbell, you want to unshare your screen, and then we can kind of talk about that?
Yeah.
I think the first important thing is, did you guys understand what Campbell said at the beginning in her background about how bees use circadian clocks to navigate? Like there's a classic figure of that. Let me see if I can find it. So I just Googled. Lila?
I think about the percentage thing. I think in it mentioned that like almost like 50% of like both the like chemicals that they expose them to lost their circadian rhythm. So it's like I think half, but I don't know if that's exactly what I was saying. But
yeah, and I think that is kind of how we measure. So in pharmacology, we talk a lot about drugs in my classes, but every chemical has a lethal dose. Every chemical, right? And so we actually measure lethality as the dose at which 50% of things die. It's called the LD50, the lethal dose at 50% lethality. Okay, LD50. But if you're not measuring death, but you want to measure disruption, I think what Lila said is kind of how you do it. This is, let me see if I can, a new tab. And share. This is how bees, that doesn't work, hold on. There we go. This is how bees navigate. So they use the position of the sun and a wiggle walk, a waggle walk, and they continue to do this waggle, walk around, waggle, walk around, waggle, pointing towards the source. The thing is that where those flowers are relative to the sun are going to change throughout the day. So this waggle walk is compensated by their circadian clock. And as you saw, when they get any type of light, if this would be, I guess, figure 2, when they get light, it slows down their clock so much that it ruins their ability to be precise about where those things are. And if they can't be precise about where those flowers are, they also can't tell how to get back home. And so what Dr. Tackenberg was telling me, this was like 4 years ago, he said that in the colonies that he had set up, the hives that he had set up, the ones he was treating with the drug were losing, they were precipitously losing bees. The bees just wandered away and didn't know how to get back. It was kind of sad. Nobody helped them. Nobody held their hand and brought them back home. It was very, very mean. But does that sort of answer the question as best we can? Yeah. All right. What else? Nothing? You guys see the problem here, though? Like, colony collapse. Bees are responsible for pollinating essentially every grain and nut and fruit that you eat. And we've been losing our bees. Or the bees have been outcompeted by a bunch of different species from other places. Like there's an African bee that's very, very vicious. Miss Lift, do you have anything to add? I don't know if you're still here. Conservationist? No? Is she not here? Miss Hughes, is she not here? You don't think so? Do you have anything to add?
Not really. Sounded pretty good.
Okay. Well, I think that was an interesting paper, and it was a long time coming. They've been working on that since like 2013 or something crazy. And it got published in 2020. That's nuts. 7 years it took. Campbell, good job. Oh, good job, Campbell. Yes. There you go. Yeah. And all you guys who helped her out presenting, very well done. That's how it should be. That's how it's going to be from now on. It only took us 2 years to get it right, but here we go. All right. So see you guys later. And Merry Christmas if I don't see you. Bye-bye.
Merry Christmas.
Thank you.
Thank you. Merry Christmas.
Thank you. Merry Christmas. Bye.